Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Hello and welcome to the program for June 9th, 2020, which in the Hebrew calendar is the 17th of Sivan, 5780. I am Walter Bingham and glad to be back to bring you a new program. My absence was due to updating my broadcast studio situated here at my home so that I can bring you even better programs with interesting interviews from far and wide. In this program, I shall talk about the warped Israeli politics and the politicians who can never get enough reward for being cooperative. The possible outcome of the trial of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and its consequences for the country is the subject of an interview with the chief diplomatic correspondent of the Jerusalem Post. On June 1st, 58 years ago, was the date on which the architect of the final solution for the extermination of the world's Jewry was executed by hanging in Israel. To commemorate that day, you will hear a historic interview with the man who literally captured Eichmann in Argentina. But as last week we celebrated Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, and this week, June the 6th to be precise, is the secular date of the reunification of Jerusalem, I begin with some of my experiences in Jerusalem a few years later in 1971. I ought to say that the program should have been aired on Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, but I still had technical problems that I hope are now ironed out, and I'm doing my best to keep up with and learn the new technology, but don't worry, I'll get there. When I heard the speeches in praise of Yerushalayim and some of the reminiscences of those who experienced the Six-Day War, now an unbelievable 53 years ago, I'm reminded of my most memorable experience in Jerusalem, not on June 6th, but a few years later in 1971. By the way, the early days in June have quite a different significance for me, when in 1944 I landed on the beaches of Normandy with the British Army. But that's a story for another time. All my life I prayed for the time when the Jewish people will return to Jerusalem, and every prayer contains a reference to our return to the Holy City, even grace after meals. So it was that in the summer of 1971, when totally by myself I piloted my small but very sophisticated aircraft from London to Lod Airport in Israel, today called Ben Gurion, and back again 2 weeks later.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
One early afternoon, I decided to fly to Eilat, but I first landed in Atarot to refuel. That was Jerusalem's airport, now closed. As I took off, I asked the tower for permission to orbit over Jerusalem. I did, very low over the city. The sun was in the west, and it was one of those days when everything was golden. The Judean hills, even the Jordanian hills in the distance, and of course the Holy City. It was really Jerusalem of gold. Instead of seeing different aspects of the city dependent on one's location, the whole of Yerushalayim was below me. The old city with the Temple Mount and Western Wall, the newer parts of the city, and the outskirts. To circle just about 250 meters above the city was so emotional that I cried loudly with tears rolling down my cheek, and all the time I had to pilot that plane at low altitude. All my life I prayed towards Jerusalem, and here I am, flying like a bird above it, with the roar of the engine announcing my presence. It was something that I never imagined to be possible. An unforgettable experience that I thought might interest you as we just celebrated Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day. The immortal words of General Gur came to my mind at the time. Ha habayit beyadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands, and the chief rabbi of the IDF, Rabbi Goren, blowing the shofar. The commander of the liberation of Jerusalem was General Moshe Dayan, who was hailed as a hero. Unfortunately, he was also appointed defense minister just before the Six-Day War, as that operation became known. Dayan was a brilliant general, but in my view a totally inexperienced and inept diplomat who had the power to make the inexcusable and wide-ranging decision to hand the administration of the Temple Mount back to the Jordanians, and to this day we suffer the consequences. Unfortunately, also to this day, we have not learned from the error to appoint generals to senior diplomatic posts. Today's politics of Benjamin Netanyahu show the relevance of Einstein's definition of insanity. I believe that everyone is good at something, but it's not possible to be good at everything. I've been watching the antics of Prime Minister Netanyahu and believe that they are the last gasp before his political demise. Let me say at once that I have always admired his diplomatic skills, which has brought Israel onto the world stage. He has managed the economy to get Israel a high mark on the relevant financial indices, and he has had the foresight to lock down the country much earlier than most, and so prevented COVID-19 to overtake Israel. As a result, pro rata of population, Israel is doing a lot better than most, but more about him later in the program. Unfortunately, in addition to dealing with the coronavirus, Israel is still in the midst of a political crisis, despite the fact that last month a new government was finally sworn in after 500 days of administrative limbo. The formation of this government showed up the real character of our current and aspiring politicians. Not only did they prevent a government coming into being after 2 elections, but even after a final agreement to form a unity government, the disgraceful squabbling did not stop, but got even more intense. It became clear that the motive of Israeli aspirants to enter a political career is not what you think, a desire to contribute to the improvement of the economy and our standing in the world, and most of all, the betterment of the population, such as full employment, increased income, and improved education, among others. But you'd be wrong. It's all about power, ministerial post, kudos, and money. Let me give you an example. The leaders of 4 center-left parties, Benny Gantz, Gabi Ashkenazi, Moshe Ya'alon, and Yair Lapid, decided that their electoral chances are best if they form an alliance. They called it Blue and White Party. It paid off, and they achieved a majority of votes. Gantz was to try and form a government, but was unsuccessful. As a result, President Rivlin should have given the opportunity to Netanyahu, but instead pushed for a unity government. True to tradition, competition for government posts was stronger than the Bond of the Four, and Gantz and his Israel Resilience Party split from the rest, and with his 14 members of Knesset decided to join with Netanyahu in a prospective unity government. It was agreed that following 18 months of Netanyahu as Prime Minister, Benny Gantz is to take over. Then Netanyahu will take the reins again for 6 months before handing it again to Gantz for the last 6 months of the 4-year government term. What a farce. Israel will now have 2 prime ministers. Benny Gantz will need a separate office as alternative prime minister with the appropriate staff to handle affairs of state. Several cars, of course, like Netanyahu. He also holds the portfolio of Defense Minister and has an office there. What about a suitable residence for the alternate Prime Minister with all the staff, cooks, servers, cleaners, security and office staff? And finally, he has, of course, an office in the Knesset with several staff. 4 fully staffed offices. By the way, almost all 14 Knesset members of his Israel Resilience Party have been given ministerial appointments. This government is a joke. That's not all. This new government has the largest number of ministers ever, including deputy ministers in the country's 72-year history. Because there were so many members of Knesset who had to be rewarded for finally agreeing to the proposed government, and there were not enough ministries to go round, some that traditionally had 2 departments were split, and even new departments were created, like, for instance, community strengthening and advancement, as a reward for a former Labour and Meretz affiliate who now runs with Likud. I couldn't find out what this ministry is supposed to do, but what I do know is that it qualifies for a car and driver, security and all the administrative staff and spokespersons. Can you imagine the cost of what I have described? And all that during the period of the coronavirus that caused massive unemployment and businesses going to the wall. It'll take a very long time for our economy to fully recover while these ministers enjoy their perks. As a gesture of solidarity, New Zealand's Prime Minister and all her government took a 20% pay cut for the next 6 months, and Austria's government will donate 1 month's salary because of the coronavirus. Don't expect our greedy government to consider such a gesture. On the contrary, you will remember that only last January the Knesset voted itself a pay rise, while approximately 2 million Israelis living in poverty, including 800,000 children, not to speak of the Holocaust survivors who have to decide whether to spend their meager income on food, medicine, heating or cooling. The elderly in Israel receive a state pension of about 1,500 shekel a month, which is something like $440. They did that while for more than a year there was political stalemate and not much work could be done in the Knesset. Back to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who I said a few minutes ago stands before his political demise. I used to be one of his strong supporters, but today believe that his only concern is his own political survival, even if it meant to surrender to the demands of the left and sacrifice his loyal supporters. He has also surrounded himself with noddy men, people who nod approval to all his actions. He displayed ruthlessness in breaking his promises, not only in politics, which he does very often, but he will trample over his once trusted colleagues. I was reporting from a Likud rally where Netanyahu told Nir Barkat that he will become finance minister in the next government led by him. Barkat got nothing, and nor did one of his most senior people in the Likud, Gideon Sa'ar. Not to speak of Yamina, whose main supporters of Netanyahu, Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, were left out in the cold. I can only find one explanation for this inexcusable conduct. He's afraid of competent competition. As far as Gantz is concerned, he doesn't consider him a serious rival, and he will never allow him to reach the changeover date. Long before then, the wily fox will have engineered a ploy to remove him. The argument that Netanyahu cannot serve because he is under indictment has been dismissed by the High Court, and in law he is innocent until the final appeal is dismissed by the High Court, should a lower court have convicted him. I believe that can take at least 18 months. Only then can Gantz safely resume as Prime Minister, unless there will be another election, because the average lifespan of an Israeli government is about 2 years. Netanyahu has repeatedly stated that he is innocent. He also believes that he is indispensable and that only he is capable to run the affairs of the country. We shall now have to wait and see. Having said all that, there still remains the question of justification for an indictment. In a brilliant piece, Herb Kynan, the chief diplomatic correspondent of the Jerusalem Post, laid out in simple language the options before the court. Kynan draws a comparison between the case of Michael Flynn. Stay tuned and hear why after the break.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show. And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Kynan draws a comparison between the case of Michael Flynn, President Trump's first national security advisor, who was railroaded by the FBI to admit to them about having made a false statement about Russian involvement in the 2016 presidential elections, and comparisons with some similarities to the indictment of Netanyahu. The Flynn case was recently dropped by the Department of Justice because of severe irregularities by the prosecution and is now at its appeal stage. I am pleased that Herb Kynan has joined me on the phone from his home near Jerusalem to explain some of the vexed questions that face the court and the consequences for the country. Welcome to the program, Herb Kynan.
Thank you. Thank you, Walt.
You just heard me say in the introduction that the Department of Justice dropped the case against Flynn because of irregularities. Are you implying that there might be irregularities in the Netanyahu cases?
I'm not implying that. I'm just saying that sometimes things happen. And sometimes situations where even if before a case it appears to be cut and dry or open and closed, sometimes things do happen. I'm not saying that that's happened in this case. I don't know if it's happened in this case. But here you have a case in America where this was a huge case, and all of a sudden, Justice Department is saying that they want to throw it out. That decision, by the way, is up in appeal, so we don't yet know what happens to that. But there were apparently irregularities in that case.
So now let me come to the main reason I'm calling you. If Netanyahu were to be found guilty of any or all the counts, he will have to face the consequences like any other citizen, and his political career would be at an end. If he's found innocent, he'll go free and can continue in politics. Now, the headline of your piece in the Jerusalem Post reads, "Regardless of the outcome of the trial, the country loses." Why?
Well, let's say that he's convicted. Let's say that the Prime Minister is found guilty of what he's been accused of, the bribery, the fraud, the breach of trust. In that situation, it's bad for the country because its leader, the man that's voted in a number of times, the court has declared is a crook, is a criminal. That's a bad situation for the country to be in. That's a loss. Now, take the other alternative. Let's say that the court finds him innocent. Then you have a situation where it will appear to many people that the prosecution, the whole apparatus of the prosecution, the whole Justice Ministry prosecution was out to get him, that they were indeed trying to frame him, to set him up, right? That itself is a loss. So either way, the country loses.
Now, in a nutshell, all the counts of which Netanyahu stands accused basically pivot on his efforts to receive favorable press coverage. Would you agree with that?
Two of the three cases. One case, the one with the gifts, right? Case 1000, which doesn't have to do with press coverage.
Now,
but the other two do.
According to law professor and eminent defense lawyer Alan Dershowitz, to try and get a favorable press cannot by any stretch of the imagination be construed as criminal. And you quote New York Times columnist Brad Stevens, who was once also editor of your newspaper, wrote that, and I quote, "sleazy behavior isn't the same as criminal conduct. So is prosecution justified?"
The Stevens quote, he actually was referring to the Flynn case. Stevens is no fan of Donald Trump by any stretch of the imagination, and no fan of Michael Flynn. In the column, he mentioned some of the things that Flynn did, which he termed sleazy. But sleazy isn't criminal. So, yeah, he wasn't necessarily referring to the Netanyahu case, but
Sure.
one could perhaps, say the same thing over here, too. If it doesn't look nice, if it's sleazy, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's criminal, and that's what the judges are going to have to decide. If something on the face of it looks to be kind of off or untoward, is that criminal behavior or not? I mean, that's what we're up against.
You argue that if the Prime Minister is removed from office, the country will lose faith in the political system. Now, hasn't that already happened after the recent repeated elections that left the country for such a long time politically impotent?
Walter, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why not. Because if you look at the voter turnout, we had 3 elections within 11 months. If the country did indeed lose faith in the political system, then one would have expected that the voter turnout would have gone down. That's not what happened. Voter turnout actually went up. So I don't think the country has yet lost faith in the political system. I think, though, however, if they see that the Prime Minister is being convicted, that could lead them to lose faith in the political system. My concern is right now you have a situation where either they lose faith in the political system if he is convicted, or they lose faith in the legal system, ironically or paradoxically, if he's not convicted, because then they'll think that this thing was, he was set up from the very beginning. So again, that's why it's kind of a lose-lose proposition.
So as you say, if he were acquitted, then the prosecution would have egg on their face. There's another reason, as you say, that to lose faith in the system.
Much more than egg on their face. They'll have a huge multi-layered omelet on their face, right? I mean, because they investigated the Prime Minister. They expended a lot of resources to do so. They brought an indictment in. If it doesn't hold up in court, then that's going to make them look very bad. And I think to a certain extent it'll get people to question the legal system. And I think that's dangerous for the state. The citizens need to have faith both in the political system and in the legal system.
But isn't there already much criticism of the judicial system, which doesn't act as it should, as one branch of the 3 governing bodies, but rather more like the legislature as well? Isn't that justice politicized?
That's very much an argument you have in this country, right? Has the Supreme Court overextended? Are they too active? Have they usurped the role of the Knesset? We're very much in the midst of that debate, and where you stand on that, depends kind of on your political views.
How do you explain the metamorphosis of Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit from supporter of Netanyahu into becoming a flea in his hair?
Look, again, this depends on your preconceptions. I mean, there will be those who say that there was no metamorphosis. He's just doing his job. He was a Netanyahu ally. He was presented this material, and with this material, he decided there was enough evidence there to indict him. Right? It wasn't personal; it was professional. There are those on the other side who will say that, well, he was a Netanyahu ally at one time. However, he's under the influence of a quote-unquote very left-wing judicial system who wants to bring down the Prime Minister. He was allegedly or somehow involved in the Harpaz affair. Perhaps they have something against him, and for that reason, he's turned against Netanyahu. Right, those are the 2 arguments that you about Netanyahu. I tell you, Walter, I think the problem that some of us have today is that we're never willing to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. I think you see this regarding Netanyahu, and I think you can see this regarding Mandelblit as well. With Netanyahu right now, everybody's going to say, or when the trial is going on, a lot of what he does will be seen within the prism of, is he doing this in order to influence the court? Right, annexation or extending Israeli sovereignty to the Dantum area. Is he doing it on the merits, or is he doing it to influence the court? Maybe just give the guy the benefit of the doubt and say, well, he's doing it because he believes in it. The same thing with Mandelblit. Is he going after Netanyahu because he has, an axe to grind with Netanyahu? Well, Netanyahu appointed him as cabinet secretary and then made him attorney general. So what axe does he have to grind? Maybe he, too, is just doing it based on the material before him. So sometimes maybe it's worth giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Netanyahu doesn't get it because he's already being tried by the media. So finally, the trial will end. There'll be a verdict. But why, I ask again, won't it end well for the state of Israel?
Because in either situations, whether he's acquitted or convicted, I think a good part of the country is going to lose faith in either the political system, which isn't healthy, or in the legal system, which isn't healthy. Because I think either way it goes, either he's acquitted or he's convicted, either half the country that supports him will lose faith in the legal system, which is bad, or half the country, if he's convicted, right, will lose faith in the political system, which is also bad. The question I think that the people might want to ask themselves is whether we should have gotten into this position in the first place, and whether maybe there would have been a way to prevent this from ever happening, from the situation ever coming to court, coming to trial. I'm American. I just remember very vividly the traumas of Watergate. And when Nixon resigned in 1974, his vice president, Gerald Ford, did something that was very, very, very controversial at the time. And he gave Nixon a part. He said, we're not going to bring this to criminal trial. He came under severe attack for it. He said, why? And they asked him, why did he do that? Because this country could not withstand that kind of divisive trial. And I think what we're on the precipice of right now is a trial that's going to put Israel very much through a grinder. It's going to be extremely divisive, and you have to ask yourself the question of whether this is ultimately good or bad for the country.
What's your estimate of the time that it'll take?
I think it'll go on for years. I mean, you're talking about a trial. I think they got 330 witnesses. There's going to be all kinds of procedural stuff. I mean, this will go well beyond the 18 months that Netanyahu is supposed to be in power in this rotation agreement with Benny Gantz. And that's just a trial. And then you have to exhaust the appeals process as well. So this thing can go on for years.
Well, only time will tell, and we'll have to wait and see. Herb Kynan, thanks again for having been my guest, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Walter. All the best.
Herb Kynan is Chief Diplomatic Correspondent of the Jerusalem Post. On June the 1st, it's 58 years since, following a trial in Israel, the only ever death sentence was carried out when Adolf Eichmann Yamach Shemoy was executed by hanging, burned in the crematorium, and his ashes were scattered in the Mediterranean Sea far beyond Israel's territorial waters. He was indicted on 15 criminal charges, including crimes against humanity, war crimes against the Jewish people, and membership in a criminal organization. Following the Wannsee Conference on the 20th of January 1942, where the final solution of the Jewish question was decided, SS Obersturmbannführer, that's Lieutenant Colonel, Adolf Eichmann, was charged with the task to oversee the deportation to concentration camps of all Jews of Germany and the countries under German control.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on The Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Adolf Eichmann was charged with the task to oversee the deportation to concentration camps of all Jews of Germany and the countries under German control, a task which he fulfilled happily and diligently, and which ended with the murder of 6 million.
After the war, with the aid of the International Red Cross, he obtained a fraudulent travel document in the name of Ricardo Clement, technician, aptly described, with which he boarded a ship heading for Argentina on July 14, 1950. Eichmann lived there under this false identity and worked for Mercedes-Benz until he was kidnapped by Mossad, taken to Israel and brought before a specially convened civilian court. Found guilty of 15 charges, including war crimes and crimes against humanity, he was executed by hanging in 1962 and is the only person to have been executed in Israel on conviction by a civilian court. Former Arutz Sheva show host Tovia Singer interviewed Peter Malkin, who describes in great detail how he and the group he led captured Eichmann. This is the edited interview.
Ben-Gurion already after the war, 1945, ordered to capture Eichmann. But took about 15 years later that we located him, and that was really by accident. Like many big things happened by accident. It was the trial of Nuremberg, and some man called Hermann heard the name Eichmann. The man is not on the trial. He disappeared. So he remembered that his daughter is dating a young man called Eichmann, and he gave this message to a man called Fritz Bauer, a prosecutor in Hessen, and he brought it over to Ben-Gurion and Israel, and we sent an agent, and he came to conclusion not the man. Only 1.5 years later, Ben-Gurion and Israel decided to create a team that will go and find out if he's the man or not. If he's the man, we bring him over to Jerusalem to stand trial. It was not an act of revenge, not an act of killing somebody. It was an act of justice and moral to bring over the man that was only 15 years after the war. They can tell the story for the new generation to understand what happened. And then we created a team to go there.
You were in the Mossad for 27 years. You were in Israel's Secret Service.
Right.
And you first were an agent, and later you were the chief of operations. You've accomplished many things, including finding out the Soviet spy who had penetrated the highest levels of Israeli government.
Schweilberg was the man who was with Ben-Gurion that I captured him, my team. You don't do nothing by yourself. It's always a team who helps you. But I guided him to capture him. He was my professor, by the way.
This is all very personal for you, I would imagine, because you lost members of your own family in the Holocaust. So for you, Eichmann must have been the most extraordinary job that you were given in the Mossad.
I lost my sister and 3 children, and I lost about 150 of my family, and nobody stayed alive there. All were murdered, and Eichmann was the one who guided this murder. So for sure it was personal, but many people ask me, do you want to kill him, do you want to strangle him, and all this. It is not fear, it is responsibility, because once he's in your hand, and he will escape. I couldn't live later to say the man who killed so many people, millions of people, 6 million of Jews, 1.5 million of children, and also non-Jews. I tried to capture him, I wouldn't succeed. I couldn't be, not in Israel, and not in any place, and I couldn't stand with myself that this chance I didn't execute.
Here he describes the evening of May 11th, 1960, when, knowing where he lived and also his alias, the team went into action.
Most exciting evening, the night of the capture, after we've been there about 4 months following him, trying to find his location. And what amazed me, that he was a family man. He had a boy called Hassi of 6 years old. And after all this, it came the night of 11th of May 1960, 8:20 in the evening. I remember it because he was late 20 minutes. And we've been very nervous about it. And he came, and my problem was to capture him or not. The 2 things. It has to be very speedy, about 9 seconds, that nobody will see, because he lived exactly opposite the police station, and also his son was waiting for him every evening. So I have to put the car in a way that the police wouldn't see and his son wouldn't see. So it has to be so quickly that people wouldn't doubt what it was, if it was an aggressive act. So the second thing is, like in every act, and that's the most important thing for everybody, the decision to act or not to act. And that was the most important. I couldn't say I'm going to do it. because it depends on the area, it depends on the police, depends on the people who are going around, and only in the last minute I have to say yes or no. You know what? The concentration is the most important thing. Because at that time I thought about my mother, what she would say, what in Israel will happen when Eichmann will be brought, and suddenly I say, shut up, close yourself and concentrate. When I walked there, in the moment I knew only one sentence, uno momentito, senor. When I say uno momentito to him, he already retreated, I captured him, we fell a little bit, I took him on my shoulder, somebody came, we put him in the car, we are on the way.
You are listening to Peter Malkin, the former Mossad agent who physically captured Adolf Eichmann.
I remember that day I went to buy gloves, and these gloves were, somebody gave $1 million for the gloves to be in the museum, and another $68,000 we gave it to Chernobyl children. I said, I have to put some gloves on my hand because I couldn't believe that I will hold this mouth that gave orders to kill so many people with my bare hands. So I went to buy the gloves, and I remember when I hold his mouth, and I said to myself, really, that was the first time that changed my life. I said, what makes a man like me and you to do all these atrocities? My co-author was to write monster, and I said, no, don't say monster, say a human being. And that is the problem, as always. The human being, how he became, that he can make all the atrocities. The human being that looks like me, looks like you, looks innocent, loves his family, and still kills others with no mercy.
He was literally in your hands. Did he struggle? Did he immediately comply with your orders to remain silent? Your practice capturing him over and over again, did it go well?
You're talking to professionals. What do you mean you struck? I have it in my hands. One, the surprise is the first. I knew I'm going to capture. He didn't know that I'm going to capture him. I knew how. I knew when. I knew everything that he didn't know. You take somebody by surprise. And I have captured so many people, even my family, everybody, and I practice it again and again. It was 20 seconds later because he moved a little bit, and these 20 seconds has to be perfect, that nobody, no the police, nobody will see, no his son, and we'll go over. The fear was, when we hold him, we didn't know how we will transfer him later, so it was very important that he will be transferred to his place, to the villa where he's going to stay, that nobody will be a link or knowledge that he is there, because the police will look after him, the Nazis will look after him, and his children will look for him. That was important, that he will be clandestine held till we'll have a chance to bring him over, and we didn't know how to bring him, but it was important, and the order was by Ben-Gurion and Israel to capture him and then to see how we're going to transfer him. I have to disguise him.
You had him in a hidden place.
10 days.
Right, 10 days. Did you ever ask him, why did you do it?
It was not my task. I had to capture him. That was my task. Capture him and bring him over. But like every Jew, we want to do a little bit more. When I held his mouth, I said, I have to know why. Why did he do it to the children of my sister? Why did he do it to so many people that I knew? I have to ask him this question. You know, we are not Nazis, we are not German officers that we can't ask questions. I didn't even thought about if I can ask or not. I decided I'm going to ask him. So these 10 days were the most important thing in my whole book, is the talking to him, because that was the first day that somebody talked to him, an Israeli talked to him for sure. He never dreamt it's going to be like this. And after 2 days, he asked me, are you the man who captured me? I said, how do you know? He said, I'll never forget the uno momentito, senor. So I said to him, yes, I'm the man. And that gave me the opportunity to ask him, and I said to him, I want to ask a question about your small boy, Hasi was a small son, about 5-6 years, blonde, blue eyes. He said to me, did you kill him? I said, why should we kill him? He couldn't believe, like revenge, we wouldn't kill his family and him. He even didn't thought about it. Our aim was only to bring him over to Israel to stand trial in Jerusalem. That was our aim. And I said, look, we didn't touch you, son. Let me ask you the question. What is the question? And I said, how is it that your small boy has 6 years old, blonde, blue eyes, exactly like the son of my sister, Yitzhakale? They could be even brothers. How is it that your son is alive Every day when you come home, he's waiting for you. And I saw him now waiting when we captured you. And the son of my sister, Yitzhak, the 6 years old, is dead. He listened to it in a minute, and then he said, wasn't he Jewish? I said, yes, for sure he was Jewish. And he said, so what could I do? That was my orders, you know. I'm just a soldier like you. You, a soldier, come to capture me. You see, we all both soldiers. I said, don't put me in your group. I said, I'm not a soldier. I came not for revenge. What kind of a chance did you give them? And that's the moment that always made me crazy, that I think about my sister standing near the gas chambers with 3 small children holding their hand, and they hold there. And what did she say to them? When she went in, she knew that's the last moment. They will never live again. And you're telling me now, Eichmann, that what could I do? You just could do not to do it. What chance did you give them? No chance. We gave you all the chances. We are not going to kill you. We didn't touch your family. We're going to bring you over to stand trial at our new generation. And the people who came out only 15 years later, the young people who came out from Auschwitz or from other places to tell what you have done and what happened, that will never happen again. That the new generation will know how to protect themselves, like people like you and Germans and others and all these people who hate so much Israel and the Jews.
What language were you speaking in?
Ich habe Deutsch gesprochen, so I spoke to him German. I speak 7 languages, so that's one of my languages that I speak. And I gave also a lecture to 5,000 young Germans. That 10 of them became Jewish. After 10 days, I said to myself, it's not 10 days, it's 10 years. I couldn't bear it. I said another day, I shook myself. It's like to talk to a man that a glass is between me and him. I don't understand him, he don't understand me. You know, he spoke a little bit Hebrew, and what he said to me, you know a sentence that I'm sure you have to know. And he said, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad. That was the moment, and I remembered my family tradition and my father. He wouldn't have to transfer him to Israel. It was terrible that he said his word, the most sacred word for the Jews, to kill more and more and more.
You're saying that Adolf Eichmann knew the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad?
Yes. He didn't say Elokeinu, he said Eloheinu. And he learned by a rabbi some Hebrew. And he was also in Israel in 36, and the English didn't give him on. He was on Haifa, and he was there to study the mentality of his victims. You know, the German, when they take something to do, they do it perfectly.
This is how they got him out of Argentina.
Israel, it was his idea that it was 150 years of the independence of South America and also Argentina. And there was a carnival and all this and that. And he decided that we'll bring an airplane over to celebrate this occasion. And Abba Even was at that time the foreign minister, and he was told to go there and to do it with a team. And he really was a bait. He didn't know that he is going to stay, and Eichmann will go with the airplane, and he will stay there in Argentina. When I heard about it, I said, bring me the uniform. I gave the size and everything and the hat, and I wanted to disguise him as a steward of El Al. And when the airplane came, I got his uniform. I dressed him to the uniform. I put on the hat, not swastika, but the Star of David. And he looked in the mirror and he said, oh, I like this uniform. Believe me, I like it. And then we have 6 people there. One of them was a doctor. Had to give him an injection, but not to make him fall asleep, but only as drunk, like one of us, like we all were, you know, because of the independence, drinking wine, and we gave the guard of the airport to drink and all this. So that's the way we put him between us, between 2 people, and went over the borders of the airport, and we went into El Al. I didn't go because I stayed behind, because as always, you know, that after every party, somebody has to clean the dishes, right? Make the cars, houses, and so on. So I stayed another month in South America. They said to me that after 10 days they will announce it, that he was captured, because as long as I'm there, they wouldn't announce it. But you know, the Jews in Israel, in the same day, already all the newspapers around the world said that Eichmann was caught. It was told all over. There was no one smallest newspaper around. I remember that at that time I went to eat breakfast and I met a woman there that I knew a long time. She said, you know, they captured Eichmann. And she was not Jewish. She said, who's Eichmann? All the newspapers said it. And suddenly she said, maybe you are the one. I said, for sure, I just came back from the kidnapping. So then he was brought over, and you know the story, but maybe it's important two things to tell. One was, we have to sign him on a paper that he willingly wants to go to Jerusalem. And he didn't want to stay until I became a little bit near to him and convinced him that it's about time that he will sign this paper because he will stand there, tell the people what he has done, because he was not the only one who created the Reich. And he accepted to sign, but he asked me one day that I will visit him in Jerusalem. And I remember 1 year later, I was standing in Jerusalem, and I didn't know that the trial is there in the Chad Ha'am. It was the house there, and I see standing a row, and I said to the guy, what are you getting here? I said, no, it's the trial of Eichmann. I said, oh, that's the chance that I will fulfill my promise. I went in there, I was standing, and he was in the glass booth, and I looked at him, and suddenly when his eyes saw me, my God, he stopped the interrogation. He didn't want to answer. And Hausner at that time, the prosecutor said, answer the questions. I said, oh my God, I'm interrupting the whole thing. So I went out. But before I left the place, the court, I looked around. The only one I knew there was Eichmann. The whole court of hundreds of people. And I believe one thing, anybody who wants to kill a Jew has to be killed before he does it. There's no question about it. I don't think it has to be other way. A murderer has to be killed before they kill us. And I have no question about it and no regret about it. I just regret one thing, that we, as human beings, as neighbors, couldn't live together and organize the things and let the children of the future live in peace. I was only brought to the team to capture Eichmann. The other rest of my life I did against Russian spies. I found the 150 Nazi scientists, a lot of anti-terror acts I did, because a good agent is not to kill. Good agency is to warn before the happening and to bring the information before it happens and not after. And I did the best I can to save life and not to kill somebody. A good agent works with his brain. Your brain is your weapon.
Truly a hero.
I did what I have to do. For me, the hero is the man who does the best he can for his country and for humanity.
That was the story of one of Israel's most successful Mossad agents. But it was only a taster. His book, co-written with Harry Stein, is called Eichmann in My Hands and is available from all good booksellers and Amazon.com. Could we do an operation like this today? I don't think so. The ridiculous constraints of political correctness are preventing much of the policing of terrorism. Peter Malkin died on the 1st of March 2005, and may his soul be elevated.
That's it for today, and I hope to be back again at the same time next and every week. So until then, this is Walter Bingham wishing you a good and safe week. For all humanity's sake, when you go out, please wear a face covering and keep the prescribed social distance. Only with everyone's cooperation can we beat this virus. And please remember that the elderly are most at risk, and you can make all the difference to their locked-up life by a visit and asking if you can do anything for them. Goodbye.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Farce from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.